It's going to make Illinois, got it. They'll make Illinois one of the nation's leaders in climate, get us off of fossil fuels, grow our economy, and so much more, with a focus on equity woven into the fabric throughout. But we're delighted to have, well, at this point, one of our great state representatives with us tonight, Dan Didech. Bob Morgan will be joining us as well. He's running a couple minutes late. And we also had Joyce Mason planning to attend, but unfortunately, she just recently developed some health issues and isn't able to join us tonight. But all three of these representatives are real environmental champions and were instrumental in delivering this legislative win for Illinois. All three of them got 100% ratings from the Illinois Environmental Council. So tonight we're going to hear a little bit about how the bill became a law and what we can all do to help make its promises become reality in the coming years. And I'd like to start tonight just by having Representative Didech spend a couple minutes just introducing himself and maybe talking about the importance of environmental leadership to him and to his district. And when Representative Morgan gets on, we can give him the same opportunity. So Representative Didech, if you care to say a few words, please.
Thanks, Jay, and thank you to Doug and everybody from the Sierra Club for putting this conversation together. I'm very excited to talk with everyone tonight. My name is Dan Didech. I represent the 59th District, which includes much of central Lake County, a little bit of northern Cook County. I live in Buffalo Grove. I represent parts of Vernon Hills, Mundelein, Lincolnshire, Riverwoods, Wheeling, and then I go north. I have a small bit of Libertyville and Green Oaks and parts of Waukegan and Park City. I want to start off with some of you probably know this and some of you maybe don't. Last year in November, Governor J.B. Pritzker was invited to give the keynote address at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Scotland. And that was shortly after we passed CEJA. And it was very notable that he was invited to give that address, because that is a keynote address that is normally given by presidents and prime ministers and heads of state. And for a governor of a state in the Midwest to be invited to give this internationally watched address about climate change is hugely significant. And the reason why he was invited to do that is because last year the legislature was able to pass CEJA at the urging of organizations like the Sierra Club and a whole host of other groups like you guys that formed a coalition that spent many, many years pushing us to take this action that makes Illinois not just a national leader, but truly an international leader in transitioning from a old-fashioned energy economy that's reliant on fossil fuels toward a green economy of the future, where we prioritize investments in electric vehicles and solar energy and getting to a place where we are at truly 0% reliance on fossil fuels. And CEJA, it's going to be a long process, right? We all know that this is not going to happen overnight, doing such a really radical transition of how we produce energy and how we consume energy. But CEJA puts us on a path where hopefully within many of our lifetimes, we will be able to see a world where, at least here in Illinois, we are no longer reliant on fossil fuels. And that's something that not in the recent past, I think a lot of people did not think would be possible. But technology has developed in a way that makes it possible, and the political will and the grassroots energy on this issue has created an environment where in Illinois we were able to get this legislation passed. So I know we'll have some time to talk about some of the more specifics of the bill, but big picture, to quote President Biden, it was a big effing deal, right? This is something that was truly a historic piece of legislation that we passed in Illinois that's made us an international leader on this issue. So has Representative Morgan made it onto the call yet, or do you want to maybe jump into some of the agenda, and when he gets here, we could give him the floor.
I don't think he's here yet, so we'll yeah, we can just pause when he gets here. So we'll just go ahead and start for now.
All right. So Doug, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Doug Orr. I'm the chair of the local group of Sierra Club Woods and Wetlands. We're in Northeast Lake County or Northeast Illinois. Most of Lake County, a little bit of Northeast Cook, and a little bit of McHenry County. So if you could tonight for this presentation, keep your stay on mute, and if you have questions, put them in chat, and we will try to address them at the end of the presentation. So Jay Futterman, we'll start now.
All right. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. So like Doug said, we're with the Woods and Wetlands Sierra. Doug and I are on the clean energy team, and our focus is on exactly that. We are working on different initiatives, a lot of which come out of CEJA, and we're always looking for more volunteers and people to join with us. So we're going to cover CEJA, what it is, how we got there, and then also where we go from here, and how all of us can play a role in that.
Why isn't it? Okay, so where did everything start with this? The Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition is a coalition of about 200 different organizations, many environmental, but also environmental justice groups, student organizations, other types of organizations, and Sierra Club is part of that. And that is the group that worked on this bill. One of the other local groups that we worked with is Clean Power Lake County in Waukegan, who has been working for about 10 years to get the Waukegan coal plant shut down, and that will actually be closing sometime this month. And part of that, I think, is some of the pressure that was put on through CEJA. They actually announced, I think, before CEJA was passed, but it was targeted to be one of the first plants to close. So the bill was actually signed last September. And as Dan Didech mentioned, it's nation leading bill that really puts Illinois in the forefront of energy legislation. One portion that's an integral part is equity in the bill. And I just want to share briefly about that. Most of the environmental pollution is most often in communities of color and low-income communities. And these are the ones that are most also passed over as when the economy grows. So everything in CEJA is designed to work with those communities and also help them in terms of growing their economy as well. So you'll see as we go along that that's an integral part of CEJA. So it was a long road to get to this, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that occurred on the way there. So before CEJA was what we call FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act. It literally passed in the last hour of the veto session in December of 2016. And it was to get us back on track with renewable power. It kind of faltered. It added in community solar for all, and also did quite a bit of work on energy efficiency and some work on workforce development. So once that got passed, which was really just a starting point, we then started working on CEJA, the Illinois Jobs Coalition. And we started by doing community dialogues. And so in the year 2018, there was over 60 community meetings across the state, getting input from the residents of Illinois as to what is needed in an energy bill. And from that was developed the format of, at the time, what was called the Clean Energy Jobs Act. That was the initial version of the bill, and that was introduced in March of 2019. And it's a big bill. It's around, originally, I think around 800 pages, and now it's over 900 pages. So what did we do once the bill was introduced? We started getting, we started organizing. We got people out to different things. We did meetings, we did rallies, petitions, and everything else. So on the left-hand photo is Eddie. He's part of the he's part of Clean Power Lake County. He's been, he organized a student strike for climate at his school and has also spoken at many of our rallies. And he's now currently the co-chair of Clean Power Lake County as well. On the upper right-hand photo was a student climate strike in Chicago. And then in the bottom right-hand photo, that was a petition delivery for Governor Pritzker. That was about 20,000 petitions that were delivered by our coalition. And oddly enough, I see Joyce Mason right there in front and center as helping deliver the petitions to Governor Pritzker. Once COVID hit, that kind of changed how we had to do things. We used to do everything in person, most visiting with legislators and in going downstate to Springfield for rallies or other meetings, but we had to go virtual. So this, the photos in the middle was a virtual rally that we held for CEJA, and there was literally over 700 people on that call. And also during that week, we also met with our legislators to discuss CEJA. In our case, because ours are such energy environmental leaders, that's just to let them know that we're all there supporting them on it. Other areas are trying to convince them to support the bill, but we're lucky here in Lake County that we have legislators that want to move forward on clean energy. So before COVID, this is some of the things that we did do. So every year we would have a big rally day, and when everyone has the green shirt, everyone knows we're down there, and we literally had at least 500 people down in Springfield for rally day. It's a really fun, it's a fun day for everyone that's involved with that. In Lake County, we always have a bus. So we get together. It's a great time to meet other environmental people, and we get ready to run around Springfield and find our legislators and talk to them about CEJA or other environmental bills as well. And then we meet in the rotunda, as you can see there on the right-hand side, for a big rally after we're done. It's a really good experience for students, especially who haven't been to Springfield before or met their legislators, because we literally run back and forth between the Stratford office building, down through the tunnel, through the Capitol building. Some our legislators are either in committee meetings, they might be in their office, they might be out on the floor. So we get to chase them down, talk to them briefly, and then we have a great rally. On the left-hand side, Representative Joyce Mason's my rep, so that's a photo where we met with her in her office at one of the environmental rallies. It's a really good experience for everyone that's involved with that. Also, we do different Twitter blasts, other media. Usually when we're on the bus, we're putting out tweets like CEJA can't wait, etc., or posting photos on Facebook of our event, and just to help get more publicity for getting our bill passed. So invariably what happens in Springfield is that you start out with a bill one way, and there's a lot of different parties to negotiate with. And so things happen that are good and some things not always quite so good. But just for example, these were some of the different competing bills that there was at the same time. The first one was ours, the Clean Energy Jobs Act. There was the Climate Union Jobs Act, Path to 100. Governor Pritzker had a group working on a bill, Consumers and Climate First Act. There was Ameren's Downstate Clean Energy Affordable Act. There was Coal to Solar by Vista Energy. So, I mean, there were some really bad bills and there's some really good bills. And, you know, we have to kind of work with everyone to come together and get something passed that that we can get everyone to vote on. And unfortunately, some things happen. You know, we tried, you know, in CEJA, there was a large nuclear subsidy. We tried to avoid that in this bill. Unfortunately, the only way it really could work out was to do a form of subsidy, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because there's actually some good news about that as well. So as negotiations got a little tense, you know, we sometimes had to hold the line, and we said no climate, no equity, no deal. And fortunately, some of our legislators also signed on to that. And all three of our reps, we're going to be here tonight, Representative Didech, Morgan, and Mason, were all signatures on that. And that helped get us the leverage that we needed to hold the line on some provisions of the bill, of a potential bill that would not have been beneficial. So in September, finally got to a vote. Both houses passed the bill, and it was sent to Governor Pritzker for signature. And as you saw earlier on, that was actually signed at the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. And here's some of the media that was there. So with all the people on the call, if you had an opportunity to participate in one way or another and getting the bill passed, you know, put something in chat about it. And everyone that worked on this, and there were literally hundreds and hundreds of volunteers across the state, a lot of staff people with multiple organizations, a bunch of our environmental legislators. It took a lot of different people to get this bill passed. So Jay, I think Representative Morgan's online now too as well.
Yeah, great. So yeah, we're really excited to have Representative Morgan join us. Representative Morgan, if you just want to spend a couple minutes, introduce yourself, and maybe talk about why environmentalism is important to you and your district, and maybe talk about the role of all this grassroots advocacy in the passing of CEJA. I think you know, that's something that a lot of people would be interested in.
Thanks so much, Jay, and sorry to everybody that I was late. Happy to be with all of you who literally made CEJA happen. I think Jay teed that up perfectly. This was such a great illustration of a bill that would not have passed but for the grassroots support. You know, the long-standing institutional carbon burning and wasting industries did everything in their power to make sure that this bill didn't happen. And it would not have happened without the advocates, without you. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of you. I know Representative Mason's not able to join tonight, but she strongly believes in this, just like I do, and just like Representative Didech does, and how important this was and how this was the top priority for us session after session until we finally got it done. This meant a tremendous amount for our community, for our future, for our children. This was just something that had to get done, and to make sure that it was done in a way that was not going to just help the entrenched interests of those who've always gotten subsidies and coal plants that have just gotten billions and billions of bailouts. This was about the future. This is about protecting our planet, protecting our community. And that was incredibly important for my district. Several of you live in this district, my district, the 58th. And it's important to us because we are so intricately connected to the environment. We have the largest amount of Lake Michigan area in my district. So we buttress the lake. The lake is part of our community. It's part of who we are. The parks, we have a tremendous amount of parks and public lands. And it's really just a core to our identity. So thank you to all of you for what you did to make this happen. And it's going to pay dividends for many, many years and generations. Jay, back to you.
Thank you. So, Doug touched on all these different competing bills that were out there, and, a lot of them were good and some of them were less good. I was wondering if our reps might talk a little bit about the negotiation process. And, one thing that I often wonder is, there's certainly, people on the other side of the aisle who, they're fiscally or socially conservative, but are there not people that realize, like, climate change is a problem, the way we use energy is a problem, and do they come to the negotiating table with solutions, or are things just so polarized that it's my way or no way in Springfield?
Yeah, so the negotiations over CEJA have been described by some of the leadership in Springfield as the most complex negotiations that they ever took part in. And the reason for that is because these issues are so complicated and there's so many competing interests, there's so many stakeholders, there's so many groups. And if you do one thing and it affects another group in one way, and you just have to be so careful of how do you strike that right balance to accomplish what we're trying to do without creating unintended consequences. And I'll just, we wanted to expand the solar energy capacity in our state, right? So we had the solar companies at the table. The electric car vehicles, we wanted to expand our electric car vehicles capacity in our state. So those industries were at the table. We had environmental groups who, like the people we're talking to today, are advocating for policies that will address climate change and protect our environments. The energy companies, right? I know the energy companies are not always the most popular people in the state, but they are going to be responsible for implementing what we end up passing through legislation. So they have to be at the table to help us craft out legislation to make sure it's actually going to work the way we want it to work. And even in our downstate communities where we have a lot of coal plants, something that I know we were very cognizant of, and this I think feeds into the notion of environmental justice, is that when we're taking an action that is really quite radical, right? We are requiring businesses to close. We are saying that coal plants can no longer operate in our state after a specific period of time. That has countervailing consequences, right? There's people who lose their jobs. There's communities that lose their tax bases. And as we're crafting this legislation, we want to be cognizant of that and mitigate those harms the best we can. So there's so much that goes into writing this legislation to make sure that it works and to make sure that we're mitigating some of the unintended consequences of what we're trying to do, that it really is one of the most complex bills that certainly since I've been in the legislature and as long as I will be in there, I think it will be one of the most complex bills that we pass.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add on top of that is relative to the partisanship that we sometimes find on complicated bills. I don't think that really was the issue. There were certainly colleagues of ours who believed that we needed to pass a bill just to save the coal industry. And we're asking about where's the Clean Coal Jobs Act. But more than that, really, it was not a partisan issue. I think Dan really nailed it. It was, what does this mean for the nuclear plant in my community? What does this mean for my community that used to have a coal-fired plant? How are we going to retrain these employees and invest in retraining of those employees? How are we going to make sure there's infrastructure for Bloomington or some other town that wants a greater electrified infrastructure for electric vehicles, right? Those are the conversations, and really making sure that our resources, because at the end of the day, we have a finite amount of resources coming from energy, coming from our energy bills, and making sure we're investing for future electrified, non-fossil fuel, not fossil burning type energy. And so that really was a complicated issue for all the reasons Dan just mentioned, but also we were doing this over a number of years. And so we were constantly dealing with factors that had nothing to do with this negotiation, things like what was happening at the federal level, plants that were closing, irrespective of what we were doing with our negotiations, advances in technology and challenges in trying to recruit new technologies, new businesses to the state of Illinois in terms of future clean energy jobs. I mean, this was just such a complicated thing. And because it took place over a number of years, it was a constantly moving end goal.
Great. And I'm sure trying to do all this in the midst of a pandemic didn't make it any easier too. So, all right, well, we talked about how we got there. Let's talk about what's actually in the bill. So Doug, if you want to pop the slides back up. All right, so what exactly did we win here, right? So it's a big bill. There's a lot of money involved. Some of the sort of highlights here are it's going to get us to 100% carbon-free power sector by 2045, and there's specific concrete interim steps along the way. Renewable energy is going to supply half of our energy by 2040. There's a target of 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. There's a ton of money being put towards investments in new renewable energy. A lot of money for former fossil fuel communities and workers and workforce developments and equity. And like Doug and I have mentioned, equity is really at the center of this bill, with 40% of the benefits and investments going towards communities that have been traditionally left behind. And there's, like we've mentioned, it's a big bill, right? So there's 8 major pillars to it. And we'll go through most of these with varying detail. That jobs and economic justice is a major pillar. Renewable energy, carbon-free power, just transition for fossil fuel communities. Then we have information about inclusive financing and energy efficiency, some of the less exciting parts, but also very important. And utility accountability and electric transportation are also big pillars to CEJA.
So looking at some of the different pillars, jobs and economic justice, that's always been one of the foundational things. Is as we are transitioning from energy, we want to one, look at some of the places that are plants closing, et cetera, but also communities of color and low-income communities. Again, like I mentioned before, Waukegan is a perfect example of this. Waukegan has 5 Superfund sites. It has the only coal plant in the far northeastern part of Lake County now, or Illinois, it's a community with a majority of people of color. So that's like one of the towns that needs to have some help, because as the coal plant closes, there's going to be loss of tax base, and they're going to need help to grow their economy. So equity eligible communities. So there's actually 2 portions to that now. One is environmental justice community, which are, like I mentioned, communities like Waukegan that have a higher risk of exposure to pollution based on environmental and socioeconomic factors. Another category that's been added in is what's called R3 areas. And these are communities that have been harmed by violence, excessive incarceration, and economic disinvestment. And R3 is defined from the Illinois cannabis law that was passed a few years ago. So as you'll note on this map, it's a little hard to read, but there's 3 different colors. If it's both a environmental justice and an R3 community, it's in purple. If it's environmental justice, it's blue, and R3 is orange. And on the inset there on the right is more of the Chicagoland area. So you can kind of see what communities fit into those categories. So one part of this is workforce training programs. There will be 13 new clean jobs workforce hubs. This is way more than previously occurred through CEJA. And it sure looks like Waukegan should be one of the communities that will be benefiting from that. So that will be for all of the far northeastern part of Illinois. Then there will also be the pre-apprenticeship programs run by unions, and then returning residents clean jobs programs. This will be about $80 million a year that's invested into workforce training programs.
Okay, so the second major pillar of CEJA is renewable energy. So talking in Illinois mostly about wind and solar. All right. And, with CEJA, Illinois made a little jump from, next to nothing to close to 10%. But that's kind of where CEJA ended. And now with CEJA, there's going to be a lot more money going towards wind and solar development. And it's going to get us on our path all the way up to 50% by 2040. And a lot of that money goes to expanding already existing programs like rooftop and community solar. But there's also several new solar programs, including solar on schools and equity focused programs like equity eligible contractor solar and community-driven community solar.
So,
and kind of going hand in hand with renewable energy is carbon-free power, right? So we're trying to move away from carbon-based power for all kinds of reasons. Obviously for climate change and for respiratory health. And a lot of the focus of this has been brought on from a lot of the youth members in the Clean Jobs Coalition. And here's some photos from some of the demonstrations that were taking place in the lead up to getting CEJA passed. All right, so like I had mentioned before, there's a very specific timeline because we can't just say we want to, have all renewable energies by this date and have all fossil fuels shut down by this date. So it's happening with a timeline. So initially,
well, hey Jay, I'm just going to jump in real quick too.
Yeah.
I think the question about what were some of the sticking points. This particular slide was one of the key negotiated, complicated, debated issues. So when you hear Jay talk about this was something that really was keeping us from passing this legislation because there were so many interests at play.
Right. Yeah. So initially, there's a lot of coal closures that are already happening for just economic reasons, even before CEJA happened. But CEJA has all private coal to be closed by 2030. There's going to be a ramp down in natural gas electricity generation, starting with the dirtiest plants and those that are in environmental justice communities. And then those fossil fuel plants that are left have targeted decreasing emissions levels. And by 2045, all fossil fuel generation is slated to close. And one of the big sticking points that kind of came up at near the 11th hour with this bill, as Representative Morgan was mentioning, there's a large downstate coal plant called Prairie State, which is one of the largest carbon pollution sources really in the country. And it's just an enormously complex issue with how it's kind of interwoven with a lot of different communities throughout the state. And, hats off to our leadership down there for coming to something that will hopefully work and will, satisfy everyone to some degree and get us off of fossil fuels. But as we mentioned, fossil fuels also provide jobs and provide tax bases for a lot of communities. So an important part of CEJA is a just transition for fossil fuel communities. And there's a lot of elements to this. One of them is a Displaced Energy Workers Bill of Rights, which means, if a plant's going to close they have to give notice to the workers and provide some employment assistance, job retraining, and career services. So we make sure we're doing our best not to leave people behind.
Can't see. So inclusive financing is one of the things that is in this bill. And what that does is allow, especially for Black and brown communities that have always had trouble with loans, grants, other financial opportunities. Inclusive financing is a way to help fix that problem. And what it does allow for is on-bill finance. So it can be like on the regular utility bill instead of having to find a separate loan, and can apply to things like renewable energy, solar, energy efficiency upgrades, demand response equipment, energy storage systems. Another key part of the bill is enhancements on energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is a key part to climate solutions, because for every bit of energy we save through efficiency, that's just less energy that has to be generated from some energy source. And at the same time, we'll also save money for ratepayers. So one thing it did is that from CEJA, the energy efficiency programs were set to expire in 2030. That's now been expanded to a later date, and will allow for ongoing energy efficiency. As you can see, ComEd has a 21.5% efficiency reduction goal for 2030, 30.5% by 2040. It includes funding for both a health and safety fund to help for dangerous conditions found in low-income homes, low-income expansion for energy efficiency, and an equitable energy upgrade program. That's part of the pay-as-you-save financing. Another item in this is a stretch energy code. So Illinois does have statewide energy efficiency codes. What the stretch energy code does is there will be like an alternate code that can be used that will be even more efficient. And any municipality would be allowed to adopt this code. So any community that wants to really go even further and have even more efficient programs can adopt the stretch energy code. There's also a section on utility accountability, grid planning, and rate. So just touching on one portion of that, as I mentioned earlier, there had been a subsidy for the nuclear plants that totaled about $700 billion. But there was apparently a provision written into that if energy rates rose to certain levels, that they would have to give that back. So literally, Commonwealth Edison will be rebating about $1 billion over the next year. That will be monthly credits, estimated to be roughly $20 for the average residential consumer, that will be given back over the next year. Now, the one caveat to that is the reason that they are doing that rebate is because there's been a global increase in energy due to numerous factors, the economy recovery from COVID, the war in Ukraine, things like that. So there will be rate increases, but at least we are getting $1 billion back. And it's estimated to be about $237 a year on average.
And the final pillar of CEJA that we're going to talk about is electric transportation. Transportation is one of the leading sources of carbon pollution in the United States, and there's especially in Chicagoland, where there's it's the transportation hub of the country. And so there's some exciting provisions in CEJA, again, with the goal of getting 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. The final rules of this, I believe, are set to come out sometime next month. But there's a goal of creating a $4,000 per vehicle rebate for purchasing an electric vehicle, and also a rebate for covering the cost of installing charging stations at home. So exciting stuff in the world of electric vehicles for Illinois.
Okay, so we'll go back to a few questions and then we'll look at questions in the chat. Representative Didech or Morgan, is there anything you have that you know about as far as that nuclear rebate, what wound up being from a subsidy back to a rebate to the consumers?
Yes, so the way that the nuclear subsidy was negotiated and how it was structured in the bill, and it was really quite clever the way that it was done, is that it was dependent on the price of energy. And when energy costs were below a certain level, then the nuclear plants would receive subsidies to make sure that they had the enough operating capital to continue to perform their operations. But when the cost of energy went above a certain level, they would be required to rebate that money back to consumers. So like you said, very exciting. It's good for consumers, or at least it'll help mitigate some of the costs, some of the high energy costs that we're seeing right now. The typical consumer is going to get about $200 back over the next year, which is something that will, certainly with the cost of living right now, is something that will be helpful.
Okay, and also along on the nuclear side, there was a provision written in the bill. I know Representative Mason worked on. Unfortunately, she's not here to talk about it, but I know both of you are involved in it as well. That Zion, having a closed nuclear plant, has lost a substantial tax base. There was a provision written into the bill to get compensation for Zion for having to store spent nuclear fuel there. Can either one of you comment on what went on with that?
Yeah, I think you really described it, Doug. This was something that wasn't going to be in the bill until, in particular, Representative Mason, Representative Mayfield, Representative Didech, and the Lake County contingent really stood up and said, this has to be in the bill. And we did that very forcefully in a way that was not missed, and it just wasn't going to pass without that. And I'm incredibly proud about that, because that really was something that it wasn't going to make it into the bill unless we stood together. Dan, I don't know if you have additional thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, so I saw a question in the chat about what types of things did we do to ensure that the equity provisions were realized and that we were being responsive to environmental justice concerns. And this is just a perfect example of that. The city of Zion has been, the finances of the local governments in the city of Zion were completely decimated when the nuclear plant closed. And having that site there not being cleaned up has made economic development very challenging. It has had negative impacts on home values. It is, and it's no coincidence that Zion is a community that has a very large minority population. Those are the communities that disproportionately have bore the negative economic environmental brunt of the historically negative energy decisions that have been made by energy companies to locate their facilities there and then abandon those communities when they were no longer useful to the bottom line. And the work that we did to demand that relief for Zion was included in this bill. And it was something that made us not very popular in Springfield in some quarters for a period of time. There's sometimes a culture in Springfield where the strong leadership and the representatives are expected to vote yes and go home, and that's about it. But I think I could give you a half dozen examples where the Lake County House delegation approached our jobs very differently and demanded that when we're passing big bills in Springfield, our community can't be left behind. And what we did for the city of Zion in this bill is, I think, a really good example of that.
Yeah, and I'm a Zion resident, so I'm very grateful because we actually literally have the highest tax rate in the county because of the loss of revenue from the nuclear plant. Is there any particular elements of the bill that you're most proud of?
I mean, honestly, what you just talked about, to me, there are a lot of elements of the bill that are tremendous. I think the offset of nuclear subsidies for anything the federal government might someday give. I could go down a list, but honestly, I think, you know, Dan and I would say to you in the Lake County delegation, just incredibly proud about the funding that we're putting towards the Zion community that has been waiting for this for decades. And it just reflects, I think, what the community needed and us stepping up and making sure that that was part of the conversation.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is also that Waukegan is going to be one of the environmental justice workforce hubs in the entire state. So in the coming years, we're going to see additional direct investments in the city of Waukegan as far as helping entrepreneurs start their business if they're in the clean energy sector, job training, a whole host of investments in the city of Waukegan that our expectation is it's going to make that city a actual real hub of economic activity in the energy sector.
Thank you. That's great. And as we mentioned, this bill is large and complex and over 900 pages, and it's taking time to roll out. Do you know when like the workforce hubs might be rolling out? Have you heard anything?
No, I don't know. Yeah, no, that's one of the things that I'm sure will take longer than we want it to. But it's in the bill, it's fully funded, and in the coming years, I would expect that to start popping up.
Okay, thank you. And then I think we have some questions in chat that we can try to go through. Ann Main, you asked a few questions. Would you like to ask those?
Oh, sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is so interesting. So I was just wondering with the equity aspect, which I would also say is really also environmental, right? I mean, economic, because when these coal plants and that nuclear plant were built, those communities look very different than they do now. They were immigrant communities, Eastern European. So I think it's also important to keep some of those historical aspects in mind. But how do we go about making sure that monies go to these areas? And my thought was, you know, we had, and I know you both worked on this with the cannabis bill, right? And the licenses were supposed to go. There was supposed to be a social and equitable justice factor in there, and that hasn't really panned out for a variety of reasons. So how do you kind of ensure that this money goes to where it needs to go? And then I have a second related question, if I may.
Sure, and I'll start there, and so I don't forget the first question. And so, Ann, thank you for that. And you know, with the cannabis bill, just like with CEJA, it was incredibly complicated. It had a lot of elements. One element that was and has been very, very successful is, in fact, the R3 program, which has already put out over $75 million throughout the state to these communities that are identified as historically disadvantaged communities. And now Waukegan will be receiving this money. So from a grant perspective, which is really the apples to apples comparison for CEJA, that investment is happening already. And the true art about that I think the state should be really proud of and gets clouded by a lot of the licensing issues is the fact that is community driven. Those grants are grassroots up instead of top down. The communities determine what grants they need from the cannabis tax revenue. And in this case, Dan alluded to this, we were 120% sure that Waukegan was going to be included in these communities. And trust me that we checked, we rechecked, and we triple checked again to make sure that in fact our communities were getting resources from that.
Okay, great, thanks. So my related question is, I noticed with where the money is going in for the jobs, it looks like you, unless it's hidden somewhere, that none of the money was being directed to the local workforce development boards. And sitting on that, Lake County has a robust workforce development board that is already reaching out. We've got virtual training where we work with employers, we're working with CLC, and yet it looked like, the people who already have that infrastructure in place, who are already communicating and already working with these communities, are you reinventing the wheel too much? And that some of this money should go to people who already can do these sorts of things?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question, and I think my answer to that would be is we created 16 of these hubs throughout the state, and most parts of the state do not have that sort of capacity that Lake County has done a really good job of building. So I think in the interest of uniformity and not overcomplicating the bill, I think we went with the same model in all 16 hubs. That's with that being said, going forward, I would be very receptive if additional legislative action is necessary. If Lake County and Waukegan would be a viable location for more of a pilot project, more of a partnership between the state and the local infrastructure, I would be very receptive to that. And I see Bob nodding his head. I'm sure the rest of the delegation would be too. So that may be something. I know Lake County has a very robust legislative agenda. If you guys have an interest in
Okay.
adding something like that, that's something we would be very receptive to, I think.
Well, and short of legislation, not to cut you out of all the work that you have to do, but as someone who does sit on our workforce development board, perhaps another way is, how do we make connections between these grassroots organizations and get them tied in to something that's already existing? Again, I just hate when we have to reinvent the wheel. Let's make the money go for training people. So maybe that's, not to bore everyone else, but maybe that's a conversation that we could have later about how we could make those connections. So thanks so much.
Okay. Dave Kraft had a question. I don't know if Dave's here, but I can read it.
Yeah, I'm here, Doug.
Okay, go ahead, Dave. You want to ask your question about the nuclears?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Dave Kraft, Director of Nuclear Energy Information Service in Chicago. We're a 41-year-old, as of yesterday, nuclear watchdog organization based in Chicago. And we've done a lot of work over the decades with the community of Zion in terms of the decommissioning, in terms of the waste that's still there. And we did work with the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition on the EJ issues in particular to try and figure out a way to get proper environmental justice compensation for reactor communities. Now, I really want to thank, Representative Didech, Morgan, and Mason for that. I don't know how you did it in the 11th hour, but thank you, because nobody else was able to do this before. But the problem does remain. The ICJSA couldn't figure out a way to get other reactor communities included in the EJ stuff. And that Exelon Constellation is going to be coming back in 2026. And those communities are going to have the same problem again. And you guys in the legislature are going to have to duke it out with them one more time. So my question here is essentially, let's be proactive, and how can we plan ahead to include the nuclear communities and the environmental justice programs that CEJA has started in a way that anticipates rather than deals with a crisis of those problems that will come up that Zion has already faced for the last 2 decades.
I'll start real quickly. I think that's an excellent question, and that has to be the goal. Unfortunately, the reality of all the different issues and pressing community needs have forced us to be reactive. I know Dan and I would both love to be more proactive, and I think in the next 2 years, I think that will be the goal. We have been it's a whack-a-mole situation where all these communities that have been put in these horrible situations, and then these large multi-billion-dollar companies just abandon their towns after they decimate their environment. We've done some good things. I don't think you hear either of us saying we've done everything we need to do. I think there's a lot more to do, and I think that's a really important point. That as we move into this next phase of implementation, but also what else remains, we should be more proactive.
And we'd be more than happy to work with you on that in the future in terms of getting resources or getting expert witnesses, that sort of thing, to get that sort of stuff put into motion.
Okay, thank you. Diane Stark, you had a question?
Just wanted to know if with energy closing earlier than we anticipated, is it a possibility that CEJA will be able to clean up those coal ash ponds?
Yes, so there's a piece of legislation that passed the Senate. We did not, it was called for a vote in the House. It came up a little short. That would do just that. That would require them to clean up those coal ash ponds. So when we talk about the importance of grassroots energy and persuading legislators and raising the salience of issues, I think that's another ripe issue that could use some more attention. We simply didn't have the votes yet to pass it. I know all of us in Lake County voted yes. We were a few votes short. So we're working on that. We're trying to build support for that. And that is something that I know Representative Mayfield is spearheading, and we're very supportive in her efforts on that.
Yeah, I believe that's SB 3073, if I remember right, on that bill. Robin, you had a question?
Yes, thanks. So I've been working with not only Sierra Club, but I'm a member of the Climate Reality Project. And as far as the new goals, rules, regulations that are set out for the state to meet based on emissions, energy, all of those things, there are a lot of communities up in this area who they lack resources. So when it comes to those communities having to meet these goals, are there plans to find enough assistance for those communities to actually do the work?
I don't know if I have a great answer to that question. One aspect of CEJA that I do think this is a good opportunity to highlight, though, is for our solar energy subsidies, we expanded the eligible projects for that to include community solar projects. Previously, it was just for basically just for single family homes, and we expanded those subsidies that they can also be directed towards community solar projects. So I know I've had a couple school districts and a village in my community that are in the early stages of exploring whether they're able to put together a community solar project. But if your group, or if you're working with local governments, have specific ideas of how we can do a better job on that, certainly something I'd be very happy we could talk offline and try to figure out what exactly we have to do to be more supportive of those efforts.
Okay, Seema, you had a question?
Thank you, Representative Didech and Representative Morgan, for all your work on CEJA. I'm the founder of Go Green in Vernon Hills in Lincolnshire, and we work a lot with our local schools in sustainability projects. And the question I had was, is there something in the bill that would help to move school districts away from carbon to renewable energy?
That's a great question, Seema. I think that I believe we put in the bill, and it's a combination of federal and state grants, but resources about transitioning buses to be electrified buses. It's the first thing that jumps to mind. But also, I think that there's been increasing emphasis from the State Board of Education and other state resources to push down on our school districts to be more creative and innovative, to be resourceful with the resources they have, especially in the northern suburbs like ours, where they have the resources to do a number of things to be more energy efficient and to protect our environment.
Yeah, the school buses is a big one. The one other component that I think is relevant to that is we gave our municipalities the authority to require increased energy efficiency standards for all buildings within their jurisdiction, which would include private and public buildings. So there may be opportunities to engage with your local village boards to encourage them to increase the energy efficiency standards for new and improved buildings within the villages.
And there's also a solar to schools provision as well, but I don't know that it's all fleshed out yet, but it is in the bill.
Yeah.
And Doug, I just want to jump in real quick. Unfortunately, I have to drop off. I just wanted to thank everybody for letting me join and letting Dan Didech do a much better job representing the Lake County delegation. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you so much, Representative Morgan, for being here.
Yeah. And Seema, that question kind of transitions to the next part of our presentation, right? So we have this great bill that's been passed, and what can we all do, as Sierra Club members or as members of other environmental organizations, or just as residents of our communities, to get these provisions into, to make them happen, right? So Doug, if you want to put up the next section here, we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Right. So, this is all about taking action. Our legislators have done an amazing job and put in tons and tons of work. We've put in tons and tons of work, but now let's kind of make this stuff happen. So, with Sierra Club, we have our clean energy team. We're going to send a follow-up email to everyone on the call, on the Zoom tonight, so we can stay in touch. And we invite you to join with us as we kind of carry on this work in Lake County. A lot of our focus is on, how can we work with our local units of government, with our school boards, to help get this all to come to pass. Can you pop that back on for me, Doug? So one of the things that we are working on is efficiency. So there's a couple great efficiency programs already in existence in Illinois. One of them is an income qualified program called the Illinois Home Weatherization Assistance Program. And essentially this enables people who are income qualified to get up to $16,000 of energy efficiency upgrades at no cost. So it's an underutilized program, and one of our goals is, trying to get this message out to people who can benefit from it. There are other efficiency programs out there through the utilities, through ComEd. They'll do free home energy assessments. They'll come into your house, they'll change all your light bulbs, they'll kind of point you in the direction of a lot of low-hanging fruit for reducing your energy consumption. And there's also discounts that are on, appliances, HVAC equipment, home products, and things like that you can find at the utility companies' websites. A really great resource for all this kind of stuff is the Citizens Utility Board. So you can check out CUB's website for more information on that, or work with us on spreading information about the weatherization program. Okay. Rooftop solar, right? So CEJA has restored state subsidy, we'll call it, for rooftop solar. Solar is the cheapest way to get electricity in Illinois. And one of my other hats that I wear is as a volunteer for Illinois Solar Education Association. IllinoisSolar.org is the website there. So you can find out a lot of information about, is your home right for solar? And find out how to go down that process. There is a great equity-based program for solar in Illinois called Illinois Solar for All, which can give income qualified people in environmental justice areas solar for next to nothing. So IllinoisSFA.com is the site there. and community solar. Representative Didech mentioned that. So this is a program that's in Illinois. Essentially, if your house is not right for solar, if you don't own your roof, if you live in apartment building, but still want to get your energy from solar, you can subscribe to a community solar program. Essentially, there's acres of solar panels that are being placed in generally rural parts of Illinois, but you can purchase your electricity from these solar farms for less money than you'd be paying by getting your electricity from the utility. So it's a really simple, no-lose situation to save money and get more renewable energy on the grid. Again, Citizen Utility Board is a great resource for information about that. All right. And I just want to put in a plug here again for our clean energy team. We're having our next meeting on Monday, June 27th at 7 p.m. It's going to be on Zoom. You can go to our Woods and Wetlands website. It's under the events tab. We'll follow up, like I said, with a email to you all with our information and these resources. And I think that's what we got for you for right now. So we can go through some last questions here. And if you have other questions, please put it up in the chat. But we have Representative Didech left to field the questions. So Representative Didech, I'm wondering, where do you get your electricity from? Do you have a community solar, rooftop solar, or are you in the process of looking into it right now?
So I very recently, my family just moved from a townhouse to a single family home in Buffalo Grove. So we are certainly going to be getting a solar installed as soon as possible. My family is multiplying, so we had to get a bigger house, and that is consuming a lot of our resources at the moment. So we have a 2-year-old, and then in 2 months we have a baby coming. So but yes, the answer is yes. We are going to be installing solar at our new house as soon as we can.
Awesome. Well, congratulations to you. And do you have any other advice for what we can do to, as your constituents, as residents, as environmental activists, what we can do to help continue to push Illinois in the right direction for the environment?
Just keep communicating with us and make sure we know what the environmental community's priorities are. And you can never communicate too much. So, make sure we know what direction you think the state needs to be going, what direction our local community needs to be going. I know all of us are very responsive to the feedback we hear from experts and activists and people who care deeply about this issue like we do. So I know I hear from Doug all the time. My constituents on the call, I hear from Seema and Rosemary and Ann. You all do a very good job keeping us in the loop. So keep doing what you're doing, and we will do the best job we can to be the vessels for getting that work done.
Awesome. All right. Well, if there's any other questions, pop them into the chat. Otherwise, Representative Didech, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us tonight. And even more than that, thank you so much for all your leadership down in Springfield and delivering CEJA and everything else that you do.
And if everyone wouldn't mind staying on for a minute, I would like to see if we get a picture just of the group. So thank you so much for everyone coming on to the call tonight.
And Doug, you want to put up the contact info if anyone wants to follow up with us or any of the representatives? You could feel free to email. Like I said, we will we'll follow up with you all through email in the coming days. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Have a great evening.